London is known as one of the world's most walkable cities, where historic streets, bustling squares, and thriving public spaces create a city that moves on foot. I'm Belinda Coates, and this is The Connector. Today we're joined by Shravan Joshi from the City of London Corporation, and we're going to explore how the Square Mile has transformed its transport network, prioritise walking and cycling, and plan for a future that balances accessibility, green space, and global competitiveness. Shravan Joshi, welcome to the show, and thank you for getting up so early this morning.
Hi Belinda, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been an early start, but I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you. The City of London is known as one of the world's most walkable cities. What are the reasons behind this?
So I think there's been a real focus from policymakers to make sure that the ground floor realm really is fit for purpose for people to walk around. But there's a number of factors that play into that. Focusing on the retail, the hospitality on the ground floor really helps, especially in areas where you have high densities of jobs. Again, having really good public transport connectivity helps. And in the Square Mile, we've got the highest public transport accessibility level across the whole of the transport network in London. I think we've got something like 6 mainline stations. We've got over a dozen underground and DLR stops. Elizabeth Line's just come on board in the last couple of years. And all of that, alongside multitudes of bus routes and new cycling routes, has meant that the city's just become much more meaningful and purposeful for pedestrian transport.
Shravan, as the former Chair of Planning and Transportation, you helped cut traffic and prioritise walking. But what made that possible? And in particular, what we're really interested in, was there any pushback when those changes were made?
Yeah, I mean, we've always had high pedestrian densities in the city. And if I look at the street environment, it's been actively transformed into a more pedestrian and cycle-friendly place. We've got something like 750,000 walks and wheel journeys a day across the Square Mile. And think about the densification in that area. That's a huge number. And our focus really is very much about making sure there's amenities and safety for those people. And it's got to feel like a welcoming environment for them to go into. And that's up to policymakers to create that canvas for that availability. We've got a real congested space to work with. And so prioritizing people, prioritizing pedestrianisation and cycling and all those other forms of wheeling is very, very deeply ingrained in our DNA and supported by policymakers as well as those delivering those services on the street.
Well, I love that you mentioned that you want people to feel welcome, because I certainly love visiting the City of London and we definitely do feel welcome. What's the 2030 target for reducing traffic and boosting walking and cycling in the Square Mile? What are you trying to achieve?
Thanks for that question. And I think we've got to be mindful that we've gone through a period in the last few years of lockdown, of quite restricted movements. And coming out of that, I think that we've seen a catalyst almost in people's behaviour in the way that they treat their commutes to work. And so we've far exceeded our targets to 2030 as people have emerged back into the workplace in huge numbers. So cycling has increased by about 70% since 2017, and our target to 2030 was 50%. So we far exceeded cycling.
Wow.
Over the same time frame, we had motor traffic reduced by about 34%, and our target was 25%. And just putting that in terms of freight traffic as well, that's down 21%, and our target was 15% by 2030. So we've seen dramatic changes. The pressure that puts on us is to make sure that we can keep up with that change. I mean, it's a good problem to have, right? We're not having to tell people to leave their cars at home. We're actually having to make sure that we can provide a safe and welcoming environment for them to walk and wheel in.
Tell us about the growth strategy for the City of London, Destination City. What are some of the changes that are necessary now for the transport network?
Absolutely. And I think Destination City, just to put it in context for your your viewers is a growth strategy that we came up with after the pandemic to look at how we drive and magnetize people into the center of our cities, to make sure that we have the right mix of hospitality, food and beverage, leisure, the ability to socialize in a meaningful way that drives traffic back through our streets. And that's really now evolved into a growth strategy for the ground floor realm. And that's something that we've all got behind politically in the Square Mile, and we've seen huge success. So over the, just to give you some numbers to add context, our employment workforce has grown by about 25% since the pandemic. It now stands at over 675,000 people. Talented workers, highly educated, skilled, motivated businesses and workers coming in to a really productive environment. And that's the kind of the grit, the ecosystem that we have to create in the City of London. Around that, around that, we've created an ease of commute. And I think this is at the top of the minds as occupiers, developers and investors create and shape the built environment for the future. How does it work with public transport nodes? How does it work with the spaces that we're providing for people to come into? And we came up with a statistic recently, which I was shocked by actually, that 99.6% of office space in the city is within a 5-minute walk of a rail or tube station. And that's phenomenal, right? That we've got.
It is phenomenal.
Let's be honest, it rains a lot in London, right? So we've got to have that proximity.
It does rain a lot.
So where we've seen just yesterday in our Chancellor's budget, a real drive to make sure that infrastructure investment remains a top priority. And we saw mentions in her budget of specific targeted financing available for London's infrastructure and transport. And that's really, really important that we don't lose sight of that. We had the Elizabeth line coming on stream a couple of years ago. That's brought 1.5 million more people from the southeast to within a 45-minute commute of central London. And that sort of delivery is phenomenal.
And as well as the big numbers, you also, I love the way you talk about magnetising the city. And we've talked before about commercial office space, and we've talked about the investment in transport. But what other plans are there to increase the provision of affordable housing, other public facilities and green space within the Square Mile to match up with this incredible increase in numbers coming into the city, because you've made it so magnetic?
Yeah, and look, we have to forward think as policymakers, and we came up with the City Plan 2040, which is a forward look for us to see what the sort of deliverable needs to be to accommodate the future workspace and the future ecosystems that we provide. So we estimate that we need another 1.2 million square meters of additional office floor space by that time. In my view, personally, I think that's a very conservative number. I think it'll be nearer 1.5 to 1.8 million square meters. And so if there are any real estate investors listening in, the City of London's very welcome and opening to your propositions. And that's really about transforming the Square Mile into a 7-day destination, looking at our cultural strategy, our destination strategy combined to make sure that we've got a holistic offering that people really want to come into. And it's also around making sure that we deliver a sustainable space. You mentioned green spaces. That urban almost regeneration of some of our placemaking needs to happen to make sure that we have those little corners of greenery where people can take solace, take a bit of refuge during the busy working day, sit and have a bit of mindfulness and well-being around their working day so that they're more productive, right? This is all about income generation. And so we've got to make sure people are at the top of their game, and you've got to have that nice ecosystem where people feel they have a rounded experience of being in the Square Mile. We've also then got to make sure we balance the heritage needs of the city. We've got some of the best heritage in the world on our doorstep. And alongside that, you've got these big, beautiful skyscrapers coming up. And we've got to make sure that that sort of juxtaposition really adds value to the experience that people have in our environment.
There's a lot to think about there, isn't there, Shravan? You've joked before that there are more Pret a Manger stores than there are train stations. And I think it's true. Is that because the city is so walkable, or is that because Londoners just love sandwiches?
I think we do love sandwiches. The Earl of Sandwich, I think, created the thing, and it's wonderful that there is such amenity on everyone's doorstep. There is a serious point to it, though, that there is so much availability of things like coffee shops on the ground floor, and that really is around the way that we talk to developers as they plan their buildings and say we don't want these kind of cocoon-like fortress buildings that stop people coming out into the public realm. We've got to make sure that people enjoy the street space during the day. It's not just during the rush hours, and that you create traffic for small businesses as well as big chains to survive. And that thinking, that policy thinking, has really driven some of that density of coffee shops. And I've got to say, we've also got a few Aussie flat white vendors out there as well, which is always nice to see.
We still need some better coffee in London, though. I think you're doing really well in all the ways, but I like that you won't rest on your laurels. We need some better coffee, please, in London.
We definitely do. I mean, just on a more serious point, we do have some serious legislation coming through quite soon. We've got the planning system under review with the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. We've got a Levelling Up Bill and a Regeneration Act. And all of that is going to hopefully create a more streamlined policy process, a more predictable process around planning that should give more surety and more confidence to investors coming in. We've got some great ministerial incentives coming through from government to make sure we actually do deliver on the housing promises that the government's made in their manifesto. And there's a seriousness around some of this to make sure that we do provide a city that's fit for the future.
Well, it's been so wonderful talking to you, Shravan. We could talk all day long. The City of London Corporation never rests on your laurels. Absolutely love it. Thank you for creating such a magnetic city for all of us to want to visit. And I look forward to visiting again soon. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
That's the show for today. This program has been brought to you by Harper. This is Tika, and we'll be right back.